The ache in my bones was a familiar companion, a dull thrum that started in the soles of my worn-out nursing shoes and radiated up my spine, settling into a tense knot at the base of my neck. It was the price of a double shift, the physical manifestation of desperation. The hospital's sterile, antiseptic scent clung to my clothes, a ghost of the sanitized suffering I'd witnessed for 16 straight hours. It was a smell I could never quite wash out, a permanent resident in the fabric of my life. My apartment building, in stark contrast, smelled of damp concrete, stale cooking oil, and the faint, sweet decay of urban neglect. The transition was always a shock to the system, a reminder of the chasm between the world where I tried to heal people and the one that was slowly breaking me. Rain whispered against the grimy alley walls, a soft hiss that promised a deeper chill later. It was late October, and the city was shedding its summer skin, revealing the gray, skeletal bones of winter beneath. I clutched the thin fabric of my jacket closer, my gaze drawn, as it always was, to the recessed doorway across the narrow passage. He was there, the old man, a fixture in the landscape of my exhaustion, a silent sentinel in the gloom. He sat on an overturned milk crate, his back pressed against the cold brick, a threadbare blanket draped over his thin shoulders. He never moved much, just watched the world with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of a century. Our relationship, if it could be called that, was one of silent routine. It had started a month ago, on a night much like this one, when the cold had a particularly vicious bite. I'd seen him shivering, his hands blue and chapped, and something inside me, the part of me that wasn't yet calloused over by my own struggles, had cracked. I couldn't solve my own problems. The eviction notice taped to my door, the final demand from the pharmacy for my sister's asthma medication, but I could offer a small, fleeting warmth to a stranger. I'd gone back up to my shoebox apartment, boiled the kettle, and brought him down a steaming mug of tea. He'd taken it without a word, his gnarled fingers wrapping around the ceramic as if it were a precious jewel. His nod of thanks had been almost imperceptible, but it had been enough. From then on, it became our ritual. Every night I came home from my shift, I brought him something, a mug of tea, a sandwich I'd saved from my own meager lunch, a pair of thick socks I'd found at a charity shop. He never spoke, and I never asked his name. I didn't want to intrude on the quiet dignity of his solitude. He was simply the old man in the alley, and I was the girl who brought him tea. In a life that felt increasingly chaotic and unmanageable, this one small act of predictable kindness was my anchor. It was a testament to the person I wanted to be, even as the world seemed determined to grind me into someone else entirely. Tonight, the tea felt especially important. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, had cornered me in the hallway that morning, his voice a greasy whine as he reminded me I was 2 months behind on rent. His eyes had lingered on my uniform, as if calculating how many hours of bedpans and bandages it would take to settle my debt. The eviction notice on my door felt less like a warning and more like a final judgment. I had $400 to my name, and the rent was $1,200. The math was a cruel, relentless bully. And then there was Maya. My little sister's wheezing cough over the phone last night was a sound that haunted the edges of every waking thought. Her medication cost $200 a month, a sum that might as well have been $2 million. My ex-boyfriend, Kevin, the architect of this financial prison, was a ghost who had left nothing behind but a mountain of debt in my name and a hollow space where my trust used to be. So, the tea was not just tea. It was a rebellion. It was a declaration that even with the wolves at my door, I could still find it in me to care about someone else. I navigated the puddle-strewn ground, the weak glow from a flickering street lamp casting long dancing shadows. The smell of wet asphalt and overflowing dumpsters was the alley's signature perfume. I stopped a few feet from him, holding out the familiar chipped mug. "Evening," I said softly, my voice hoarse from fatigue. He looked up, his eyes, a surprisingly clear and pale blue, finding mine in the gloom. He took the mug, his touch as light as dry leaves. Tonight, however, something was different. He didn't just nod. He spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. "You are a good girl." The words, simple and unadorned, struck me with an unexpected force. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes. No one had called me a good girl in years. In my world, I was a tenant in arrears, a debtor, a sister failing to provide. I was a collection of deficiencies. To be seen, for a moment, as simply good was a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was so raw. I managed a weak smile, a pathetic twitch of my lips. "Just trying to be. The world is hard on good people," he continued, his gaze drifting past me, toward the mouth of the alley. "It mistakes kindness for weakness." He took a slow sip of the tea, a small, appreciative sigh escaping his lips. "They do not see the steel in it." I stood there, shifting my weight from one aching foot to the other, unsure how to respond. His words hung in the damp air, imbued with a strange prophetic weight. It felt like he was seeing straight through the frayed edges of my composure and into the frantic, terrified heart of me. I wanted to tell him everything about the rent, the medication, the crushing weight that was pressing down on my chest, but I couldn't. He was my sanctuary of silence, and I wouldn't profane it with the ugliness of my life. "You should get inside," he murmured, his voice softer now. "The cold is a thief." I nodded, pulling my jacket tighter. "You too. Don't stay out too long." It was a silly thing to say. This alley was his home, as far as I knew, but the sentiment was genuine. He gave another one of his barely there nods, his attention already returning to the street beyond, and I retreated, the warmth of his strange pronouncement still clinging to me as I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my cold, empty apartment. The eviction notice seemed to mock me from the door. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It felt like steel. The next few days passed in a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. I picked up an extra shift, a punishing 24-hour rotation that left me feeling hollowed out and disconnected from my own body. The money would be a drop in the ocean, but it was a drop I desperately needed. I ate stale crackers for dinner and drank lukewarm coffee until my hands shook. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt of panic through me. Was it the landlord? The credit card company? A call from Maya's school saying she'd had another attack? When I finally stumbled home on the 3rd night, the world was swimming before my eyes. I hadn't even had the energy to make tea. All I wanted was my lumpy mattress and the temporary oblivion of sleep. But as I turned into the alley, my autopilot routine taking over, I stopped dead. The milk crate was empty. The threadbare blanket was gone. The space where the old man always sat was starkly, unnervingly vacant. A cold dread, entirely separate from the evening chill, washed over me. Had something happened to him? Had the police finally forced him to move? Was he sick? Hurt? I scanned the alley, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Nothing, just the shadows and the dumpsters and the silence. A profound sense of loss settled over me. He was gone. My one small act of certainty in a life of chaos had vanished. I felt unmoored, the last thread connecting me to my better self having been snipped. Defeated, I turned toward my building's entrance. The weight of my failure to pay my rent, failure to help my sister, and now, failure to even keep a lonely old man safe crushing me. And then, I saw it. Not him, but something so alien to this grimy corner of the city that it seemed to have materialized from another dimension. A car. A long, black, impossibly sleek sedan was parked at the mouth of the alley, its polished surface reflecting the flickering street lamp like a shard of obsidian. It hummed with a low, powerful thrum, a predator resting in the shadows. Its windows were tinted so dark they were opaque, mirroring my own pale, shocked face back at me. This was not a car that belonged here. This was a car that cost more than my entire building. My first instinct was to run. This spelled trouble, a kind of trouble I was in no way equipped to handle. But my feet felt rooted to the cracked pavement. As I watched, the passenger door opened with a quiet, expensive-sounding click. A man unfolded himself from the vehicle. He was tall, impossibly so, and dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored, it seemed to have been spun from shadow and steel. His shoulders were broad, his posture radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. He moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He stepped fully into the weak light, and my breath hitched in my throat. He was handsome, but it wasn't a soft, approachable kind of beauty. It was a dangerous beauty, all sharp angles and stark contrasts. His jaw was a blade, his cheekbones high and severe. Dark hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes were the darkest I had ever seen, and they were fixed directly on me, a gaze like a magnet, pulling me in, holding me fast. He knew who I was. There was no doubt in that stare. It was a look of assessment, of ownership, as if he were cataloging every frayed nerve and every ounce of fear in my body. I felt a tremor start in my hands. This had to be about money. Maybe Kevin's debts ran deeper and darker than I'd ever imagined. Maybe these were the people he'd borrowed from, the kind of people who didn't send polite letters. My mind raced, trying to find an escape route, but the man took a slow, deliberate step toward me, closing the distance. "Alara," he said. My name was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim. His voice was like his presence, a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in the air, in my very bones. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. Alara Vance. I could only manage a nod, my throat tight with fear. How did he know my full name? My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You have been bringing my father tea," he stated, his dark eyes never leaving mine. The words hit me like a physical blow, rearranging my entire understanding of the situation. My father, the old man, the quiet, solitary figure on the milk crate, was this man's father. The thought was so absurd, so impossible, that for a moment I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. The juxtaposition of the two was jarring. The frail, silent man in a threadbare blanket and this titan of power and wealth, who looked as if he could command armies with a single glance. Before I could process the revelation, another sound cut through the night, the low growl of engines. I tore my gaze from his, looking past his formidable shoulder. Two more black vehicles, enormous SUVs this time, had silently pulled up, blocking both ends of the alley. They were identical, monstrous things with tinted windows that seemed to swallow the light. My little alleyway had become a cage. Doors opened in unison, and men emerged. 4 of them. 6. All dressed in the same dark, impeccably tailored suits as the man in front of me. They moved, with a chilling synchronized professionalism, taking up positions around us. They didn't look at me. Their focus was outward, scanning the rooftops, the street, their hands held loosely at their sides in a posture that was anything but relaxed. They were soldiers, protectors, jailers. My nascent flicker of steel crumbled into dust. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. This was a show of force, a display of power so overwhelming it was suffocating. I felt small and utterly insignificant, a moth caught in the gravitational pull of a dark star. The man, the sun, took another step toward me. He was close enough now that I could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne and something else, something sharp and metallic, like cold steel and colder money. "My father's name is Marco," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, and therefore more menacing, level. "And his sentimentality has put you in a very dangerous position." I don't understand," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "I was just—" He looked cold. "I know what you were doing," he cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your kindness is a liability I did not account for. Others have noticed you, my enemies." He paused, letting the weight of that word settle in the space between us. Enemies. The word sounded alien on this street, better suited for a movie than my miserable life. "They see you, a lone woman showing kindness to a vulnerable old man. They see an opportunity, a point of leverage." My blood ran cold. He was talking about me, as if I were a chess piece, a strategic weakness on a board I didn't even know I was playing on. The reality of my situation began to dawn on me, sharp and terrifying. My simple acts of kindness had been observed, catalogued, and interpreted by a world I knew nothing about, a world of predators. "For your own safety," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "you will be coming with me now." It wasn't a request. It was a command, an ultimatum delivered with the certainty of a king. There was no room for refusal. The men positioned around us were a silent, formidable testament to that. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my shock. "Coming with you? Where? I can't just— I have a job." "A sister. Everything will be taken care of," he said, the statement a dismissal of all my pathetic little concerns. A man stepped forward from behind him, a man with a stoic face and a scar that cut through one eyebrow. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes on his boss. "Roman," the son said, without looking away from me. "Her apartment, 4B. Pack a bag with her necessities, personal items, photographs, nothing else. Have it sent to the house. And handle the landlord, Mr. Henderson. Settle her account and ensure he forgets her name." He then turned his attention back to me, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Your sister, Maya. Her medical needs will be met. A private courier will deliver a year's supply of her medication to her school tomorrow morning, along with a new nebulizer. A fund will be established for her care. She will want for nothing." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it stole my breath. He spoke of my life, my problems, my family, as if they were trivial errands to be delegated to his staff. He knew my landlord's name. He knew about Maya's asthma. He had investigated me. The knowledge was a violation, stripping me bare in this cold, damp alley. He had laid out the entirety of my desperate existence and was now offering to solve it, all in the same breath that he was taking my freedom. The man named Roman nodded once. "Sir," He turned and walked toward my building's entrance with two other men, disappearing inside. I watched them go, a feeling of profound unreality washing over me. They were going into my home, my private space. They would touch my things, sift through the meager artifacts of my life. "You can't do this," I whispered, the protest weak even to my own ears. "I can," he replied, his voice a soft, dangerous rumble. "And I am. You can come willingly, or Roman can carry you. The outcome will be the same. The only difference is your comfort." He extended a hand, not to me, but toward the open door of the sedan. It was an invitation into a cage, but a cage that promised solutions to problems that were drowning me. The eviction notice, Maya's wheezing breaths, the predatory gleam in my landlord's eyes. He was offering to vanquish all my dragons, but the price was myself. I looked at his handsome, merciless face, at the silent soldiers surrounding us, at the opulent car humming with latent power. I had no choice. I had lost control of my life the moment I first offered a lonely old man a cup of tea. My kindness had not been a weakness. It had been a trigger, setting off a chain of events that had led me to this, the moment, to this man. With a sense of fatalistic surrender, I took a step toward the car, leaving my old life behind in the rain-slicked alley. The door closed behind me with a soft, final thud, sealing me inside a new world of velvet silence and unimaginable danger. The interior of the car was another world entirely. The city's cacophony vanished, replaced by a tomb-like quiet. The seats were plush black leather that felt impossibly soft against my worn jeans, and the air smelled faintly of leather and his cologne. It was a cocoon of luxury, a stark, jarring contrast to the sirens and shouts of my neighborhood. The man slid into the seat beside me, the space suddenly feeling much smaller. He didn't look at me. He simply tapped on a small, integrated screen on the armrest, and a pane of dark glass slid silently up, separating us from the driver. We pulled away from the curb with a smoothness that made it feel as if we were floating rather than driving. I watched the familiar, grimy facade of my apartment building recede, the flickering street lamp shrinking until it was just another indistinct point of light. In the city's sprawl, I was being taken, abducted. And yet, a traitorous part of my mind couldn't ignore the profound sense of relief that was unfurling within me. No more worrying about Mr. Henderson. No more agonizing over pharmacy bills. He had plucked the thorns from my life with an effortless, terrifying efficiency. The gilded cage was already starting to feel more gilded than cage. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice small in the vast silence of the car. He turned his head to look at me, his face partially illuminated by the passing streetlights, throwing his sharp features into dramatic relief. "To my home. It is the only place I can guarantee your safety. And your father, Marco, is he okay?" The question was out before I could stop it. Despite the fear, despite the bizarre circumstances, my concern for the old man was still there. A stubborn, resilient flame. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps something softer, crossed his face before it was gone. "He is fine. He is at home. He has moments of clarity and moments when he forgets. He wanders. My security is usually better. They failed tonight. It will not happen again." There was a cold edge to his voice on that last sentence, a promise of retribution that made me shiver. Why was he there? In that alley? I pressed, emboldened by his response. "He grew up in that neighborhood," he said, his gaze turning to the window, watching the city lights blur past. "Before everything. He says he goes there to remember." I believe he goes there because it is the one place my influence is thinnest. A small act of rebellion. He fell silent for a moment, and I had the sense I was being given a glimpse into a complex, painful family dynamic. He should not have been there. He should not have involved you. He didn't involve me in anything, I said, a spark of defiance lighting in my chest. I chose to speak to him. I chose to bring him tea. He turned his intense gaze back on me. And now I am choosing to deal with the consequences. Your choices have consequences, Alara. As do mine. The finality in his tone shut down any further argument. We rode the rest of the way in silence. A heavy, charged quiet that was thick with unspoken questions and terrifying answers. The car journeyed from the city's gritty heart to its wealthiest, most secluded suburbs. The landscape transformed from cramped brick tenements and neon-lit storefronts to sprawling, manicured lawns and stately homes hidden behind high walls and iron gates. We eventually turned onto a private road, winding through a dense forest that seemed to swallow the car's headlights. Finally, a set of colossal iron gates, adorned with an intricate, stylized M, loomed before us. They swung open without a sound, and we proceeded up a long, sweeping driveway, and then I saw the house. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a modern-day castle of glass, steel, and dark gray stone. It was built into the side of a hill, overlooking the distant, glittering expanse of the city. Lights glowed from within its vast windows, warm and inviting, yet the structure itself was imposing, angular, and utterly intimidating. It was a monument to power, a declaration of dominance over the landscape itself. The car glided to a stop under a wide portico, and the driver's door opened. A moment later, my own door was opened by another man in a dark suit. The man beside me, my captor, my savior, a man whose name I still didn't even know, got out and stood waiting for me. I hesitated, my hand gripping the leather armrest. This was the point of no return. Stepping out of this car was stepping into his world, completely and irrevocably. He seemed to read my thoughts. "My name is Dante," he said, his voice softer than before, yet no less commanding. "Dante Moretti." He extended a hand to me. It was not a gesture of courtesy, it was another command, gentler in form, but not in substance. I took his hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. A strange jolt, like a low-voltage current, shot up my arm. He pulled me gently from the car, and I stood beside him, dwarfed by his height and the sheer scale of the house before me. The air here was different, clean, crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth, a world away from the alley's miasma. Roman appeared at Dante's side, holding a small, plain cardboard box. My box of personal items. My whole life, reduced to a handful of photographs and trinkets. "The apartment is clear," Roman reported, his voice a low monotone. "Henderson has been compensated for the termination of the lease in his silence. He understands the arrangement." Dante nodded, his eyes still on me. "Good. See to it that Miss Vance is shown to the guest wing, the East Suite." He finally released my hand, the loss of contact, leaving my skin feeling strangely cold. "Get some rest, Alara. We will talk in the morning." With that, he turned and strode into the house, disappearing into the vast, brightly lit foyer. A woman in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, appeared in his wake. She had a kind but professional face. She gestured for me to follow. I was passed from one keeper to another, a parcel being delivered. I followed her through the enormous front doors, into the belly of the beast. The interior was even more staggering than the exterior. The foyer was a cavern of white marble, with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. A massive, modern chandelier, a cascade of crystalline light, hung in the center. The walls were adorned with huge, abstract paintings that I instinctively knew were worth more than I could earn in 100 lifetimes. The air was still and silent, the silence of a museum or a cathedral. It was beautiful, but it was not a home. It was a statement. The woman led me down a long, wide hallway, our footsteps echoing on the polished floor. She didn't speak, and I was too overwhelmed to ask questions. We took a private elevator, a silent, glass-walled box that ascended through the heart of the house, offering glimpses into different levels, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a formal dining room with a table that could seat 30. Finally, we arrived at a pair of large wooden doors. She pushed one open and gestured for me to enter. "Your suite, Miss Vance," she said, her voice polite and distant. "Your bag will be brought up shortly. The kitchen staff has prepared a light meal. If you are hungry, you can use the intercom on the wall to request anything you need. Mr. Moretti will see you for breakfast at 9. I stepped inside, and she pulled the door quietly shut behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. I was alone. The suite was larger than my entire apartment. It was decorated in muted tones of cream, gray, and silver, the epitome of understated, astronomical wealth. A king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows sat against one wall. A seating area with a plush sofa and armchairs was arranged before a sleek, wall-mounted fireplace, where digital flames danced silently. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a panoramic, breathtaking view of the city lights twinkling below. It was the most beautiful room I had ever been in, and it was the most luxurious prison I could ever imagine. I walked over to the glass wall and pressed my hand against its cool, unyielding surface. The city looked like a spill of scattered jewels from this height, a place of beauty and promise. It was a lie. I knew its secrets. I knew its grimy alleys, its eviction notices, its desperate, aching heart. From up here, in Dante Moretti's fortress, none of that was visible. He lived above it all, removed and untouched. He had plucked me from the dirt and placed me in his sterile, perfect world. I wondered if, in time, I would forget what the city really looked like, what it felt like to be drowning in it. I wondered if that was the entire point. A knock at the door startled me. It was Roman, holding my small cardboard box. He placed it on a luggage rack at the foot of the bed, and then produced a brand new high-end laptop, setting it on the desk. "Mr. Moretti thought you might wish to contact your sister," he said, his face impassive. "The network is secure. You can assure her you are safe and taking a short, unexpected vacation. A cover story has been prepared, should she have questions. It is all in a file on the desktop." He paused. "Dinner is on its way." He nodded once and left, closing the door as silently as the housekeeper had. A vacation, a cover story. They had thought of everything. The efficiency was terrifying. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed to life, showing a pristine desktop with a single file icon labeled Maya. I felt a surge of homesickness, so sharp it was a physical pain. I wanted my lumpy mattress. I wanted the familiar sounds of my building, the neighbor's television, the traffic outside. I wanted my life back, as messy and desperate as it was, because it was mine. But my life was no longer my own. It belonged to Dante Moretti now. I laid back on the bed, staring up at the impossibly high ceiling, and for the first time since I'd seen that empty milk crate in the alley, I let the tears come. They were tears of fear, of confusion, but also of a profound and shameful relief. I was terrified. I was a prisoner, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. I must have cried myself to sleep, because the next thing I knew, I was waking to the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the massive window. I was still in my scrubs, my shoes kicked off on the floor. My neck was stiff, but for the first time in recent memory, the deep, abiding ache in my bones was gone. The bed was a miracle of comfort. A tray with the remains of a meal I didn't remember arriving, a simple roast chicken sandwich, and a glass of milk sat on the bedside table. Someone had come in while I slept, covered me with a soft cashmere throw, and left the food. The thought was both comforting and deeply unsettling. I was being watched over, cared for, like a prized pet or a valuable object. I pushed myself up and padded over to the window. The city below was shrouded in morning mist, the tops of skyscrapers piercing through like islands in a cloud sea. It was beautiful. I felt a pang of guilt for finding beauty in my gilded cage. After a hot shower in a bathroom that was bigger than my old kitchen, with a shower head that felt like a warm waterfall, I explored the suite. A walk-in closet was attached to the bathroom, and inside, my jaw dropped. It was filled with clothes, not my worn, faded clothes from my cardboard box, but new clothes, designer jeans, silk blouses, soft cashmere sweaters, all in my size. Racks of shoes, from practical flats to elegant heels. A small velvet box on a dresser contained a simple, elegant silver watch and a new phone. The sheer audacity of it, the presumption, made my head spin. He had not only taken me, but he had also decided to remake me, to dress me in the uniform of his world. I found my own clothes from the box, washed and neatly folded, on a separate shelf. I pulled on my own familiar jeans and a simple t-shirt, a small act of defiance. I would not be his doll to dress up. Not yet. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. It was the same housekeeper from the night before. "Mr. Moretti is waiting for you in the solarium," she said with a small professional smile. I followed her through the silent, opulent hallways. The house was even more impressive in the daylight, with sunlight streaming through vast windows and illuminating the priceless art and minimalist decor. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and profound emptiness. I didn't see another soul besides the housekeeper. The silence was unnerving. The solarium was a glass-walled room filled with lush tropical plants. A small table was set for two, laden with a breakfast spread that could have fed a family for a week. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, coffee. Dante was standing by the glass wall, looking out at the manicured gardens, a coffee cup in his hand. He was dressed more casually today, in dark trousers and a gray Henley shirt that stretched across his broad chest, but he looked no less intimidating. He turned as I entered, and his eyes swept over me, a brief, unreadable expression flickering in their depths as he took in my old clothes. "Good morning, Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I trust you slept well as can be expected for a kidnap victim," I retorted, the words sharper than I intended. A corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile I had yet seen from him. "A pragmatic view. Please, sit." He gestured to the table. I sat, my back ramrod straight, my hands clenched in my lap. He took the seat opposite me. The scent of fresh coffee and flowers filled the air, a surreal backdrop for the conversation I knew was coming. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries," he began, leaning forward slightly, his dark eyes pinning me in place. The situation is this. My father has a fondness for you. My enemies, the Falcone family, have become aware of this. They are opportunists. They would not hesitate to use you to get to him, or to get to me through him. Your continued presence in that alley would have been your death sentence. Do you understand? I swallowed hard, nodding. The name Falcone meant nothing to me, but the cold certainty in his voice made them terrifyingly real. Therefore, your previous life is over, he continued, his tone matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business transaction. It is no longer safe for you. I am offering you a new one. He leaned back, taking a sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving mine. I will settle all of your outstanding debts, the ones accrued by your former partner, Kevin Foster. They will be erased. Your sister's medical care, her education, her future, it will all be secured. You will be given a generous allowance, more money than you could spend in a year. You will want for nothing. The offer hung in the air between us, shimmering and seductive. An end to all my worries. A future for Maya. Everything I had been fighting and failing to achieve, handed to me on a silver platter, but I knew there was a price. There was always a price. And in return? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. In return, you will stay here, in this house, under my protection, he said. You will not leave the grounds without me or one of my security team. You will sever contact with your old life, save for supervised calls with your sister. You will live here with me. The last 3 words were the hook in the bait. With me, this wasn't just about protection. It was about possession. He wasn't just removing me from danger. He was claiming me. As your prisoner? I challenged, my chin lifting. As my guest, he countered smoothly, though there was no warmth in the word. A very well cared for guest. The alternative is that I give you a check for $1 million right now, and Roman drives you wherever you want to go. You would be free, but the Falcons would find you. I give you a week, perhaps 2, before they do, and I will not be there to stop what happens next. The choice, he finished, though his expression made it clear there was no real choice at all, is yours. I stared at him, my mind racing. He was a monster, a ruthless, controlling puppet master. He had laid out a trap, and I had walked right into it. But he was also the only thing standing between me and a threat I couldn't begin to comprehend. And he was offering Maya a life I could only dream of giving her. How could I say no? How could I choose my own freedom over her security? Why? I finally asked, the question that had been nagging at me since the alley. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? For the girl who gave your father tea? For the first time, a shadow of something raw and unguarded crossed his face. He looked away from me, out at the garden, his jaw tight. My mother, he began, his voice low and strained, died when I was 15. We had nothing. She got sick pneumonia. A simple infection. It would have been curable with $100 worth of antibiotics. But we didn't have $100. We didn't even have 10. I watched her die, helpless. She died because the world is indifferent to the suffering of the weak. He paused, and the silence in the room was heavy with the weight of his old grief. I swore that day that I would never be helpless again, that I would protect my family, what was left of it, with every fiber of my being and every dollar I ever made. My father? He is all I have left of that old life. He is my weakness. And you, Alara, with your simple, inexplicable kindness to him, stumbled into the one part of my life that is not negotiable. He turned his gaze back to me, and the raw emotion in his eyes was like a physical blow. You showed him a kindness that no one, not even I, has shown him in a long time. You treated him like a man, not a burden or a target. In my world, such a thing creates a debt. And I always pay my debts. His confession recontextualized everything. This wasn't just about power or possession. It was about a deeply wounded man's desperate, obsessive attempt to protect the last vestiges of his broken family. He wasn't just protecting me from his enemies. He was protecting his father's emotional well-being. He was protecting the memory of his mother. I was no longer just a liability. I was a symbol of the kindness his mother never received. I looked at the lavish spread before me, the food untouched. My appetite was gone, replaced by a complex cocktail of fear, sympathy, and a strange, burgeoning sense of connection to this dangerous, broken man. I thought of the choice he had given me: $1 million and a death sentence, or a life in a gilded cage, protected by a monster with the heart of a grieving son. "What about Kevin?" I asked, my voice quiet. "You mentioned him." Dante's expression hardened instantly, the brief vulnerability vanishing as if it had never been there. "Mr. Foster is a loose end. He is the reason for your financial vulnerability, which made you an easier target. Loose ends are a liability. I will be tying him up." The euphemism was chilling. "What are you going to do to him?" "I am going to ensure he never bothers you, or anyone else, ever again," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You need not concern yourself with the details. Consider him a problem that has been solved." I shivered. He spoke of ruining a man's life or ending it, for all I knew, with the same detached efficiency with which he'd ordered my breakfast. The chasm between his world and mine was vast and terrifying. But Kevin had ruined my life, had left me to drown in his wake without a backward glance. A dark, ugly part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction at the thought of him facing a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. The atmosphere in the house shifted over the next few days. A quiet, tense energy settled over the pristine hallways. The number of dark-suited men patrolling the grounds seemed to double. I would see them through the windows, speaking into their wrists, their eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. The gilded cage was being reinforced, its bars growing thicker. Dante was often absent, locked away in a study I wasn't permitted to enter, or gone from the house for hours at a time. When I did see him, he was coiled tight as a spring, his face a mask of grim focus. He had been true to his word. A call with Maya, on the new laptop, had been arranged. Her face, bright and happy on the screen, was a balm to my soul. She gushed about the surprise gift that had arrived for her, a box filled with months of her expensive medication and a new, top-of-the-line nebulizer. A man, she said, had also spoken to her headmistress and established a private scholarship fund in her name, covering all her tuition and expenses through college. She thought I'd won the lottery. I played along, my heart aching with the lie, telling her I'd gotten a lucrative private nursing job that required me to live in for a while. The relief in her voice was worth every lie, every moment of my captivity. One afternoon, I was reading in the vast library, a room that had become my sanctuary, when Dante found me. He didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, watching me. The tension rolling off him was a palpable force. "What is it?" I asked, setting my book down. "What's happened?" "The Falcones made a move," he said, his voice tight. "Not against us, against one of our shipping routes. It was a message, a test." "A test for what?" "To see how I would react, to see if my attention was divided." He walked into the room, his gaze sweeping over the books as if he weren't really seeing them. They know I have a new interest. They are trying to gauge if you have made me weak. The idea that my presence here could be perceived as a weakness, a chink in his armor, sent a chill down my spine. I was the liability he'd spoken of. So what does this mean? He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. It means this house is no longer just a comfortable prison for you, Alara. It is a fortress, and you will not set foot outside it for any reason. It means my initial assessment was correct. Leaving you to fend for yourself would have been a death sentence. His words, meant to justify his actions, had their intended effect. The vague, distant threat of the falcons suddenly felt very real and very close. The beautiful glass walls of the mansion no longer seemed like windows to the outside world, but like fragile barriers against a circling pack of wolves. My fear of Dante began to be overshadowed by a much greater fear of the world he was protecting me from. He was the devil I knew, and his cage was starting to feel like the only safe place on earth. The confrontation I had been dreading and, in a dark corner of my mind, anticipating, came 2 days later. I was in the solarium, trying to tend to an orchid that looked as out of place as I felt, when Roman appeared. "Mr. Moretti requires your presence in the study," he said, his face as impassive as ever. My stomach twisted into a knot. Dante's study was his sanctum, the one place I had been implicitly forbidden from entering. To be summoned there could only mean one thing. It was about Kevin. Roman led me to a set of imposing oak doors and opened one for me, closing it behind me as I stepped inside. The room was the heart of Dante's power. It was paneled in dark wood, with a massive desk, a wall of monitors displaying security feeds, and shelves filled with what looked like ancient texts rather than modern files. The air smelled of old leather, whiskey, and masculine authority. Dante was not behind the desk. He was standing near the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. And sitting, or rather, slumped in a leather armchair in the center of the room was Kevin. My breath caught in my chest. He looked terrible. His usually coiffed hair was a mess. His expensive shirt was wrinkled and stained, and there was a dark purplish bruise blooming on his cheekbone. His proper eyes, when they met mine, were wide with terror. 2 of Dante's men stood behind his chair, silent and menacing. "Ilera," Dante said, his voice calm and even, a chilling contrast to the tension in the room. "We were just discussing your financial arrangements with Mr. Foster." Kevin flinched at the sound of his name. "Ellie, thank God," he croaked, starting to get up. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I was going to pay you back, I swear." One of the guards placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, shoving him back down into the chair. "There is no misunderstanding," Dante said, taking a slow step toward him. "You took out 3 credit cards in her name. You forged her signature on a personal loan application. You maxed them all out, and then you disappeared, leaving her with a crippling debt of over $50,000. A debt that made her desperate. A debt that put her in harm's way." He stopped in front of Kevin's chair, looming over him. My harm's way. I stood by the door, frozen, a spectator at the immolation of my past. Seeing Kevin so broken and terrified should have made me feel something pity, perhaps. Instead, I felt a cold, clean sense of vindication. He had caused me so much pain, so many sleepless nights, and now he was facing a power he couldn't charm or lie his way past. Dante placed a stack of papers and a pen on a small table beside Kevin. "These documents transfer all of that debt back to you. They are legally binding. There is also a confession of fraud, which will be held by my lawyers, and a restraining order application which stipulates you will not come within 500 miles of Miss Vance ever again. You will sign them." Kevin stared at the papers, his face pale with sweat. "This will ruin me," he whispered. "It should," Dante replied, his voice dropping to a deadly soft whisper. "Consider it a gift. The alternative is that my associates here take you for a long drive, and your ruin will be more permanent. They are very persuasive." He glanced at the two men behind the chair, who both straightened slightly, their knuckles cracking in the quiet room. Kevin's hand shook so badly he could barely hold the pen. With a pathetic whimpering sound, he scrawled his signature on every page. My chains were being broken link by link, by the very man who was forging new ones for me. When he was done, Dante picked up the papers, reviewing them with a cool, dispassionate eye. "Excellent," he said. He looked at his men. "Take him downstairs. Our business is concluded. Ensure he gets a ride, far away, and that he understands the consequences of ever returning." The guards hauled Kevin to his feet. As they dragged him past me, his eyes pleaded with me one last time. "Ellie, please," he begged. I just stared back at him, my face a blank mask. I felt nothing. The part of me that had once loved him, that had once believed his lies, was dead and gone. They took him out, and the heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone with Dante. The silence that descended was profound. Dante walked over to his desk and placed the signed papers in a drawer, locking it. He had done it. He had solved my biggest problem with a casual, terrifying display of intimidation. He had erased my past. "He will not trouble you again," he said, turning to face me. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt inadequate, small. My gratitude was tangled up with fear and a strange, thrilling sense of awe at his power. "It was a necessary transaction," he said, dismissing my thanks. He poured a second glass of whiskey and held it out to me. "You look like you need this." I took it, my fingers brushing against his. The brief contact sent that now familiar jolt through me. I took a sip. The liquid was fire in my throat, but it steadied my trembling hands. We stood there for a moment, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, and I realized my world had been irrevocably cleaved in two, before Dante and after. The night after Kevin's departure, the true storm broke. The tension that had been simmering in the house for days finally boiled over. I was woken in the middle of the night by the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway and hushed, urgent voices. I crept to my door and listened. I could hear Roman's voice, sharp and clear. "They hit the warehouse at the docks. It's a full-on assault. They're trying to draw him out." My blood ran cold. The Falcons. This was it. I heard Dante's voice, a low, controlled growl of command. "Ready the cars. Full team. I'm going myself." A wave of panic, sharp and surprisingly personal, washed over me. He was going out there, into the danger he had been shielding me from. I thought of him being hurt, or worse. The idea was unbearable. Before I could think, I pulled open my door. Dante was standing in the hallway, pulling on a dark leather jacket over his shirt. Roman was beside him, handing him a sleek black handgun, which he tucked into a holster at the small of his back with a practiced, fluid motion. Several other armed men were waiting by the elevator. He saw me, and his face hardened. "Go back to your room, Ilara. Lock the door." "You can't go," I said, the words tumbling out. "It's what they want. It's a trap. It is my business to walk into traps and come out the other side," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He took a step toward me, his eyes boring into mine. "Your only concern is to stay here, where you are safe. "And what if you don't come back?" I whispered, the fear for him raw in my voice. For a fleeting moment, the mask of the ruthless crime boss slipped, and I saw the man beneath. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture was shockingly gentle. "I will always come back," he said, his voice low, fierce promise. "Lock your door." He turned and walked away without another glance, his men falling into formation around him as they entered the elevator. The doors slid shut, and he was gone. I stood in the empty hallway, my cheek tingling where he had touched me, a profound sense of dread settling in my stomach. I did as he said. I went back to my room and locked the door, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I spent the rest of the night at the window, staring down at the distant city lights, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in for the safe return of my captor, the monster who protected me. The hours crawled by, each one a small eternity. The house was unnervingly silent, a sleeping giant holding its breath. I paced the length of my suite, the plush carpet wearing a path under my restless feet. I imagined the worst gunfights in dark warehouses, squealing tires on wet streets, the metallic scent of blood. The scenarios my mind conjured were lurid and terrifying, fueled by years of watching crime dramas that now seemed chillingly naive. This was real. The man who had touched my face with such surprising tenderness was out there, in the heart of that violence. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. When I heard the faint sound of cars on the gravel driveway, my heart leaped into my throat. I rushed to the window, pressing my face against the cool glass. The fleet of black SUVs was returning. They rolled to a stop under the portico, their engines cutting out one by one, plunging the morning into silence again. Men began to emerge. They moved slowly, wearily. A few were nursing injuries, leaning on their comrades. My eyes scanned them desperately, searching for one tall, commanding figure, and then I saw him, Dante. He got out of the lead vehicle, moving with a slight stiffness that wasn't there before. In the growing light, I could see his face was smudged with dirt, his hair disheveled, but he was alive. He was back. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. I sank onto the sofa, my body trembling. He was safe. The realization of how deeply I had been worrying about him, how much his return meant to me, was a shock. My feelings for him were a tangled, chaotic mess of fear, gratitude, and something else, something deeper and more dangerous that I wasn't ready to name. A little while later, there was a knock on my door. It was the housekeeper. "Mr. Moretti has returned," she said, her expression serene as always, as if her employer's nightly excursions into gang warfare were a perfectly normal occurrence. "He has requested you join him in his private quarters." My heart hammered. His private quarters. It was another line being crossed, another layer of intimacy being offered or demanded. I followed her, my hands trembling slightly. She led me to a part of the house I had never seen, up a spiral staircase to the top floor. She stopped before a single, large door and then retreated, leaving me alone. I took a deep breath and knocked. "Enter," his voice called out, low and rough. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. His private suite was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. It was minimalist and masculine, dominated by dark woods and shades of charcoal gray. A massive bed, its covers in disarray, sat against one wall. The air smelled of his cologne, whiskey, and the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder. He was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, his back to me, shirtless. My eyes were immediately drawn to his back. It was a canvas of taut muscle, but it was also a roadmap of his violent life. Old silvery scars crisscrossed his skin, but it was the new injury that made me gasp. A long, angry red gash ran down his side, crudely stitched and seeping slightly. He turned at the sound of my intake of breath. His chest was broad and powerful, dusted with dark hair. There was a fresh bruise high on his ribs. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear and sharp, and they were fixed on me. "It is not as bad as it looks," he said, his voice strained. The nurse in me took over, overriding the fear and confusion. "That needs to be cleaned and dressed properly," I said, my voice firm. "Those stitches are a mess. Sit down." He looked surprised by my authoritative tone, but after a moment's hesitation, he did as I commanded, sitting on the edge of the bed. I found a first aid kit in his bathroom, a professional-grade kit that was stocked for a small army. My hands were steady as I worked, cleaning the wound with antiseptic, my touch gentle but efficient. He was silent, watching me, his proximity sending waves of heat through my body. I was intensely aware of the warmth of his skin, the solid muscle beneath my fingers, the sound of his breathing. "The falcons?" I asked, my voice softer now as I applied a fresh dressing. "They have been dealt with," he said, his voice a low growl. "Their leadership has been dismantled. They will no longer be a threat to us, to you." He had gone to war for me. He had bled for me. The thought was staggering. I finished taping the bandage in place, my hands lingering for a moment on his warm skin. "It's done," I whispered. He caught my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. He turned my hand over and pressed his lips to my palm, a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that it shattered the last of my defenses. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice a raw murmur against my skin. "Not of them, not of dying." He looked up, his dark eyes holding mine, and they were filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I was afraid of not coming back to you, and in that moment, all the barriers I had erected against him, the fear, the resentment, the logic that told me he was a dangerous man, and I was his prisoner, crumbled into dust. I saw not the mafia boss, not the captor, but the grieving son, the fierce protector, the man who had gone into the fire and returned, all for me. I leaned in, and he met me halfway. His lips were soft, tentative at first, then more demanding as he pulled me closer, his free arm wrapping around my waist. The kiss was a collision of worlds, his darkness and my light, his power and my vulnerability. It was desperate and hungry, a release of all the tension and fear that had been building between us since that first night in the alley. It tasted of whiskey and gunpowder, and a longing so profound it stole my breath. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "Stay," he whispered, the word a plea, not a command. "Don't just stay in my house, Alara. Stay with me." I knew what he was asking. He was asking for everything. He was asking me to choose this life, to choose him. And as I looked into his tired, vulnerable face, I knew I already had. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay, Dante." The word was a surrender, but for the first time, it felt like a victory. The following morning, I woke up in Dante's bed, tangled in his arms. Sunlight streamed into the room, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the house felt like a home. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The war was over, both outside the walls and within me. Dante was still asleep, his handsome face relaxed and younger in repose. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, a profound sense of belonging settling over me. This was my new reality, and it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a sanctuary. Later that day, after a quiet breakfast where his hand rarely left mine, he took me to the study. The room that had once been a place of terror now felt different, imbued with a new intimacy. He didn't sit behind his fortress of a desk. Instead, he led me to the armchairs by the fireplace. "I need to be clear with you, Ilara," he began, his tone serious. "The external threat is gone. The falcons are broken. You are, for all intents and purposes, safe now. The original terms of our arrangement are no longer necessary." My heart skipped a beat. Was he letting me go? The thought, which once would have been my most fervent wish, now filled me with a sudden, sharp panic. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, because he reached out and took both of my hands in his. "Which is why I have to offer you the choice again, freely, this time, with no threat hanging over your head." He gestured to the desk. "There is a portfolio on that desk. In it are the deeds to a house in any city you choose, a new identity, and a bank account with enough money to ensure you and Maya live in comfort for the rest of your lives. You can walk out of this house today, and no one will stop you. You will be free." He paused, his grip on my hands tightening. "Or," he said, his voice dropping thick with emotion, "you can stay. You can make this house your home. You can make me your home. But it has to be your choice. I will not keep you here as a prisoner, not anymore. I want a partner, not a possession." The choice was laid bare before me. Absolute freedom, a life without fear or want, a return to normalcy, or him. A life of unimaginable luxury and lingering danger, forever tied to a man who operated in the shadows. A life of passion and protection, but one that would always be on his terms, in his world. I thought of my old life, the constant struggle, the gnawing anxiety, the loneliness. I thought of the profound relief I'd felt when he'd solved my problems. I thought of the terror I'd felt when I thought he might not come back. I thought of his kiss, of waking up in his arms. The life he offered on paper was safe and easy, but the life he offered with his heart was the one I wanted. My old life wasn't freedom. It was a slow, grinding form of imprisonment. Here, with him, I had found a different kind of freedom, freedom from fear. I squeezed his hands. "I'm not going anywhere, Dante," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My home is here now." The relief that washed over his face was so profound, it was like watching a stone statue come to life. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips, transforming his harsh features into something breathtakingly handsome. He stood, pulling me to my feet and into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "You will not regret this, I swear it." He then pulled away slightly, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small, velvet box. My heart began to pound. It wasn't a ring. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was an antique silver locket, tarnished with age and intricately engraved. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with unshed emotion. "It was the only thing of value she owned. She gave it to me the day before she died. She told me to give it to the woman I chose to build my family with." He carefully removed it from the box and fastened it around my neck. The cool metal felt heavy against my skin, a tangible link to his past, a promise for our future. "My mother would have loved you, Ilara," he whispered. "She would have understood your kindness, Tears welled in my eyes as I looked down at the locket. It was more precious than any diamond, more binding than any contract. It was an offering of his heart, his history, his trust. It was his version of a proposal, a declaration that I was no longer a guest or a liability. I was family. A week later, life had settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full of a quiet, hopeful energy. I spent my afternoons in the garden or the library, and my nights with Dante. He was a different man with me, away from the pressures of his world. He was tender, attentive, and surprisingly funny. He showed me the vulnerable boy who still mourned his mother, and I showed him the resilient woman who had found her strength, not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. One sunny afternoon, I was in the rose garden with Marco. His dementia came and went in waves, but today was a good day, a lucid day. He was sitting on a stone bench, a blanket over his lap, despite the warmth, telling me stories of the neighborhood he grew up in, the same neighborhood where I had lived. He spoke of stickball games in the street and the smell of his mother's baking. "You know," he said, his pale blue eyes twinkling as he looked at me, "I knew you were special from the first day. You have her eyes." "Her eyes?" I asked gently. "Whose eyes?" "My wife's," he said with a soft, sad smile. "Dante's mother. She had that same look, like you could see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." He reached out and patted my hand. "He's a good boy, Dante. Just broken in places. He needs someone to help him mend." I smiled, my heart full. "I know." I looked up toward the house and saw Dante standing on the balcony of his study, watching us. He wasn't smiling his new, rare smile. He was just watching, his expression one of profound, unguarded peace. He had built this fortress to keep the world out, to protect what he loved, but in doing so, he had also locked himself inside. My accidental kindness to his father had been the key he never knew he needed. I had stumbled into the alley and found not just a lonely old man, but a lonely king in a castle of his own making. He raised a hand in a small, private wave. I waved back. The sun was warm on my face, the scent of roses filled the air, and the locket rested heavy and warm against my chest. My life of fear and instability was a ghost, a story that had happened to someone else. My future was here, in this beautiful, dangerous, loving cage, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly free.